Foreign Policy magazine's recent issue called Oil the Long Goodbye was the subject of a panel discussion in D.C. on Wednesday. It was held by the magazine and the Chamber. Among the panelists, Time magazine's senior correspondent Mike Grunwald, who wrote 7 Myths of Alternative Energy for Foreign Policy's a special report, and he joins us now. Mike, thanks for coming in.
No, thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. Now, oil's long goodbye was the main subject of this gathering. What was your take on sort of how, if you can sum up the conclusion of that? Do you also believe we're on this long arc of change for oil?
Well, I think we were talking about the goodbye, but we also emphasized the long.
Yeah.
I think you often hear that the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones, and the Oil Age won't end because they ran out of oil. But I always like to say, we still use stones, not as much as we used to, and I think we still use oil, which is one of the we will still use oil for a long time. A lot of what I kept pushing back at is this idea that we need to go to sort of zero emissions, zero fossil fuels right away, when in fact what we really need to focus on is changing the trend lines and just using less.
Right, as quickly as we can, I guess. Let's go to your article that was in the same issue, 7 Myths of Alternative Energy, which was great. And I just want to go through a few of these with you briefly. Among your 7 myths about alternative energy, you say we need to do everything possible to promote alternative energy. You say it's clear fossil fuels are hurting climate. The world should do everything sensible to promote alternative energy, but not everything possible.
Well, that's right. I mean, I particularly pick on a couple of alternative energy solutions, particularly farm-based biofuels, which actually make the problem of climate change worse, but also nuclear energy, which would make the problem better, but sort of not fast enough and not cheap enough. Right.
Another one of your myths is renewable fuels are the cure for our addiction to oil. You say not so, because that cure could be worse than the disease.
That's right. I think renewable fuels, particularly corn-based ethanol, sounds great in theory, because when you're growing the fuel, it's going to take some of the carbon out of the atmosphere. But people sort of forgot to think about, well, if we start devoting a lot of this acreage to fuel instead of food, well, then where are we going to grow the food? And the answer is essentially in wetlands and rainforests that store a lot more carbon than you're going to save by using the renewable fuels.
And even problems with forms of ethanol and new biofuel that doesn't take a lot of land.
Well, I think that's right, and that's, I was just out in California where there's a lot of interesting work going on about some of the second and even third generation biofuels, and I think there is some hope that you'll be able to grow a lot of fuel without using a lot of land, or at least a lot of good farmland, and that's certainly possible, but that's, people say, 15, 20 years away. The real test right now is if you're using good farmland. It basically turns out that land is really good at growing food, and we're going to need a lot of it to feed the world. It's really good at storing carbon.
Which leads to what many people think is the main problem, which is population.
Well, it's funny. I mean, the population in general, in the places that are growing the fastest, essentially, if they had more wealth, if they had more prosperity, if they had better resources, you would see that population growth come down. So I think I don't think it's so much a population problem as it is sort of a land problem and how we use it. It turns out that land just isn't so good at growing fuel.
Okay, and that was all part of your myth that said if today's biofuels are not the answer, tomorrow's biofuels will be. And you do say that. In the end, gasoline really is the short-term answer. It's just that we need to figure out how to use less of it.
That's right, and I feel I talk about this with fossil fuels like coal as well. I think it's easy to throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, we need to reduce our energy. We need to reduce emissions 25% by 2020, 80% by 2050. That sounds impossible. Well, I was just in this place where they use 50% less emissions, or 50% lower than they are in the United States per capita, even lower than that per GDP, and it's not an exotic place. It's California, right? And so we already know how to make an economy green that works and that saves a lot of energy, and it's basically through efficiency, through using more efficient appliances, more efficient industrial motors, more efficient houses that don't heat and cool the outdoors, and these things are really doable. In California, utilities can make more money if their customers use less energy. In the rest of the country, you see where utilities get paid if we use more energy. And there's been a difference in California since the 1970s. Per capita energy use has been absolutely flat. And in the rest of the country, it's increased 50%. So there are real easy ways that we can start to get at this stuff at the margins.
How do you incentivize that, though?
Well, you change the rules. So you partly do it through basically the way you set up your utility situation. So in California, there are real incentives for these utilities who are, you have your relationship with your utility. They're the ones who know how much energy you're using, and they can help you use less. They can give you incentives to get a more efficient air conditioner or more efficient heating, or they can pay you to get the better light bulbs. You're starting to see that. You're also seeing the real mandates where when you say like, we need refrigerators to be this efficient, and the manufacturers complain, but since the 70s, it's a even playing field for everyone. We've saved more energy through the efficiency mandates that we have for refrigerators since the 70s than all the renewables in the United States have produced. So again, we have refrigerators today that are larger, that cost less, but that are 3 or 4 times more efficient than the ones we used in the 70s. And it still gets our beer just as cold.
Right. One more myth is about nuclear. Nuclear is the cure for our addiction to coal. It is emissions free. Your problem with it, the big argument, I guess, with nuclear is the timing of getting it widespread.
Well, and the cost. I think the first in the U.S. the first new plants aren't going to come on until at least 2017 if they came on time, and there has never been a nuclear plant on time in the United States. People talk about the potential for an accident or the waste or nuclear proliferation. That doesn't get at me so much. I think what you just have to do is look at the math. And the cost of this stuff has increased, they're talking about tripling it just in the last couple of years. There's a worldwide monopoly for steel forging in Japan. It just, the math isn't working out. You're looking at efficiency measures to say save, they call it negawatts, sort of the kind of power plants you don't have to build. That comes out to 1 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Nuclear, they're looking at 20, 25, 30 cents per kilowatt hour. It's just not where we should be putting our resources, and that's why you see private investors just won't touch nuclear. It's all going to be cradle-to-grave subsidies from taxpayers and ratepayers.
How's the math for carbon capture sequestration? Is that a viable option?
Well, it doesn't quite seem to be there yet, but that's something where you look realistically and say, we're not going to shut down all the coal in the world overnight. That's something that we got to look at, and that's something where technology of the future is really going to be important, and we absolutely ought to be looking for synthetic fuels and better batteries and better efficiency solutions that are going to, kind of the whiz-bang solutions that are going to be really cool that we haven't thought of yet. And carbon sequestration and carbon capture, that falls right in there. That's something that we really got to look at, but it's not there right now. And if that's what we're counting on to get us down 25% by 2020, we're not going to make it. The good news is, this other stuff that's really easy and is already being done in a lot of places and is really easy to scale up. That can get us there.
Right. Well, it sounds like you like where subsidies and incentives are headed in some areas and not in others.
Well, I think that's right. I think, particularly in the stimulus bill, you've seen a lot of really, good stuff for solar and wind and geothermal that has already started to show some, and particularly for efficiency, the kind of weatherizing people's homes, the, federal buildings to try to get those more energy efficient, and electric cars as well, which is something that's going to be part of that future, particularly as it interacts with the smart grid, where you can kind of charge up your cars at night when when there's when the wind is blowing, and then give it back to the grid at times when the grid needs it. I do think there have been some problems in the way we go about transportation hasn't been as far forward-looking. We need to think of that as an energy issue. The way we have to think of agriculture as an energy issue. But again, I'm an optimist. I think that the changes, it doesn't require us, as nice as it would be if we, sort of put on a sweater like Jimmy Carter told us to, and eat less meat and ditch the McMansions and drive less. All those good conservation things that we definitely ought to do. The good news is that we actually don't need to change our behaviors to get these problems under control. Efficiency, you get more or the same with less. It's not about doing less with less. Okay,
so we can see the full lot of your 7 Myths of Alternative Energy in Foreign Policy magazine?
That's right, that's right.
And we'll follow your work with Time magazine as well. Michael Grunwald, thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming in and lending your insight.